Hello everyone. So today we will be discussing the global divide. So what is the global divide? The world is basically divided into two, the North-South divide. So the North-South divide is a socio-economic and political categorization of countries. The Cold War era generalization places countries into two distinct groups, the North and the South. The North is comprised of all first world countries and most second world countries, while the South is comprised of third world countries. Now, kanang mga first world countries, no? We often hear that term. Muna sila basically mga dato nga countries or rich countries with a democratic form of government. While kanang second world countries are also considered to be rich countries, pero ilang form of government is either socialist or communist. Now, if dili sila mo fall anang both either of those categories, no? Basically, kung pobre sila, no, then they will be considered to be third world countries, regardless of ilahang type of government. Okay? So, regardless kung democratic or socialist or communist, pero kung pobre sila, they will be considered to be third world countries. Now, this categorization ignores the geographic position of countries, with some countries in the southern hemisphere such as Australia and New Zealand being labeled as part of the north. No? So again, dili siya mo wa siya paki kung naa ka sa north or southern part sa kalibutan. No, it is not a geographical division. Okay? So, ang iyarang division is basically based on the classification of the country. So, the global north is comprised of United States, Canada, Western Europe, outermost regions of the European Union, and developed parts of Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. It is also home to all G8 and to four of the five permanent members of the UN Security Council, which is France, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia. While ang Global South is comprised of Africa, Latin America, mga developing countries in Asia, and also sa Middle East. So the Global North are basically mga first world countries. Now they are richer and more developed regions. Now 95% of the people have enough food and shelter. Sa ilang economy, the industries and major businesses, mga commerce and finance, no, they have textiles na sila lumber, clothing, machinery, leather, and wooden goods. No? So basically, industrialized kayo ang mga naa sa Global North. So in contrast, ang nasa Global South are third world countries, poor and less developed regions. 5% have enough food and shelter. Ang ilang economy is basically source ra sila of raw materials for the north, and they are heavily dependent on cotton and agricultural production. No? So for the population, no, ang division aning duha, since the world population or the total population of the world is 7.7 billion. Now, the most populous country is China with currently or the latest census ato 2020, 1.4 billion, followed by India which is 1.3 billion. The global north covers the 1/4 of the total population, while the south cover 3/4 of total population. So wealth, now the total wealth in the world is 280 trillion. Now the richest man, Jeffrey Bezos, has a net worth of 149.5 billion US dollars. So the richest country in the world is Qatar with a $124,000 per capita, followed by Luxembourg, which is in Europe, with $109,000 per capita. So the global north controls the 80% total income of the world. Inversely, kaning global south basically controls 20% of the total income of the world. For the standards of living, the South lacks the right technology. It is politically unstable, its economy is divided, and its foreign exchange dependent on primary product exports to the North. About 95% of the population in countries in the North have enough basic needs and have access to functioning educational systems. In the South, as little as 5% of the population can access basic needs such as food and shelter. For the industrial development, the north of the divide is comprised of countries which have developed economies and account for over 90% of all manufacturing industries in the world. The economies of most countries in the south rely on imports from the north and have low technological penetration. The South serves as the provider for raw materials of the North. In agricultural terms, the global South is characterized with a high rate of people working in rural areas. According to Michael Todaro in 2006, over 65% are rurally based compared to less than 27% in the global North. Similarly, 58% of the labor force is engaged in agriculture, compared to only 50% in the global north. Now, Todaro states that people in the global south concentrate on agricultural production. Since their incomes are low, their first priorities are food, clothing, and shelter. So now we talk about the division of the north and the south, no? Via the Brandt Line. So kaning Brandt line, no? Basically imaginary line na ni siya. So if you look at this map, no? Basically mao ni siya ang division. So if you can see here nga dire ni simang ni siya, no? So that it will include New Zealand and Australia sa north part of the kanang global divides. So what is the Brandt line? The Brandt line is a divisionary line which simply separates the rich countries in the north from the poor countries sa south. Now it encircles the world at a latitude of 30 degrees north. It crosses North and Central America, North Africa, and India. Then it goes down towards the south, placing Australia and New Zealand above the line. Pero recently, kaning line has become somewhat outdated because dili na kuno clear ang divide between the rich north and the poor south, in quotes. Kay tungod na if you look at development recently, especially in terms of kanang sa China, bisan kita diri sa Pilipinas, we are no longer as poor as when we were still developing in probably around the 80s, 90s, Ngayon ana. So the world has become far wealthier, or even Asian countries rather, have become far wealthier since the 2000s. This is because of globalization, which has blurred the distinction of the two. So the idea of categorizing countries by their economic and developmental status began during the Cold War with the classification of East and West. Now, the Soviet Union and China represented the East, while the United States and their allies represented the West. The term Third World was coined by states hoping to navigate between the two poles of the Cold War and ultimately gave birth to the non-aligned movement. Now, these countries were generally less economically developed when their first and second world counterparts. Now, as some second world countries joined the first world and others joined the third world, a new and simpler classification was needed. So the first world became the north, while the third world became the south. So all the way to the end of the Cold War, usa pa ni murag na coin ning inani nga division. So the term nga Brandt line was actually coined by Willy Brandt in the 1980s. No? So countries can be classified into three different types. Most developed countries or MDCs, less developed countries or LDCs, o kanang mga less developed countries kita diri sa Pilipinas no diya ta na hulog, and least developed countries or LLDCs no, or kanang basically kanang mga country sa Africa nga lupo na kayo or murag kalisod na kayo sila. So what are the reasons for inequality in the world? No, so if you look at history, basically one of the major reasons is colonialism. Second, it is kanang ato ang trade, no? Ang ato ang basically um, as discussed previously, no? Industrialized kayo ang north while ang south kay galabi ilang trade is agricultural products ra. Pero again, kaning Pilipinas, if you put it in kanang terms of katong less developed countries, no? Kita industrialized, medyo industrialized na punta, mix na ang ato ang industry na namutay manufacturing as well as kana pong processing of raw materials. And third, tungod pod sa utang. Muna siya ay mga hinungdan for inequality sa kalibutan. So, thank you for listening. On the next chapter, we will be discussing regionalism. Okay? So, I will see you on the next chapter.